Okay, so we're live. Sam, welcome along. It is not quite the day after the day before, but it is a few days after our live session last week in a very fancy location, let's be honest. You guys did really well on getting us sorted with that. And also a really good day, I would say. So that's what we're going to talk about today, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yeah, and I think I would like to say, and I know I've done this already to those that came along, but I would like to sort of start with a massive thank you to everybody who travelled, and there were some fair old distances there, and gave up their time to spend the day with us, and effectively sort of help test us and join us on this sort of mad little journey that we've decided to take ourselves on. So yeah, just it's, and I said it on the day, it's quite humbling to know, you know, these people are willing to give up their time and their day to come and help us, really. So yeah, massive thank you to everybody who was there.
Yeah, it was amazing, wasn't it? I think I know people that you've known and trusted for a long time. What I really appreciated was just how present people were in the room, and they properly gave us their brains and playing with the framework and exploring it and being curious about what we were trying to achieve and giving us some really good feedback. So it was such a worthwhile day. I think we learned a lot. We were reassured a lot, but also I think we learned loads as well, which will move the framework forward in a really helpful way.
Yeah, and it's one of those days, isn't it, where I think you put, you know, I'll be honest, I was quite nervous at the start of the day. I think that came across. I think people could realise, could spot that a mile away. But you
We
kind of
got that.
almost feel, yeah, yeah. What have we done? Yeah, something that we're both kind of passionate about and worked very hard on over the last couple of months, and all of a sudden you're laying that bare to, you know, a group of safety professionals that I've known for a very long time, and who certainly know their stuff. And yeah, there was something quite nice, but also quite terrifying about that. But it's one of those days where it probably takes a couple of days for you to really sit with some of the discussions, some of the challenges, some of the bits that we discussed on the day, some of the musings. I know there's been a couple of times where something's just popped into my head about something that we discussed, and I've quickly noted that down. So it's probably a good idea we nudge this back a little bit, because well, I was knackered the next day. I'm not gonna lie. yeah, that's it. Kind of takes it out of you, but it's yeah, certainly given us a lot of food for thought on where we take this, and what the sort of execution is, and what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, shall we talk about how we structured the day and kind of broadly
Yeah,
what we talked about? Do you think that's helpful to kind of to share with people?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
you were kind of, to be fair, you were the host of the day. I was just trying to take us off track wherever I could do
You were
with some
just the
random psychology
expert.
stories. So,
Yeah,
oh, that's
I
me.
was the
Yeah.
M. I was the MC. You were the expert. So yeah, we kicked off the day with a bit of I guess a bit of a state of the nation sort of session, really, on getting some conversations, some debate, some discussions around, culture, what's worked, what doesn't work, what are your current frustrations, what are your current challenges, particularly from a sort of behavioural perspective. In, what are we seeing, experiencing, feeling, hearing. And I guess one of the takeaway moments from that for me was that the frustrations and the challenges were largely similar across the broader people that were there. And bear in mind, we had people from very different industries. Risk profiles are relatively similar, but the frustrations, the challenges, the experiences, things that they've done in the past were all largely similar.
Yeah.
And there was this, almost kind of a moment where people kind of became quite comfortable in the fact that, it's what we do is quite lonely. But bringing, a set of people like that together in the room, you almost kind of, there's something kind of quite cathartic in hearing that other people are going through the same experiences and the same challenges as you. And I don't know, I'd be interested to know what you took away from that sort of state of the nation sort of element, because you're kind of new to our world, and whether you heard anything in there that was kind of a bit, new, or took you by surprise, or something that you took away particularly from that part.
Yeah, I think my biggest observation was the challenge that you have as professionals, as centres of excellence or service providers, support providers that sit beside and should act as an enabler in a business. But I think, like a lot of areas that are kind of seen as support or enablers, have those massive challenges around integrating into the machine that is the day-to-day operations of the business, and making sure that what you're doing is aligned to how the business runs. So I think it was really interesting to be part of that conversation, because that's something that I see with HR leaders as well. Brilliant HR leaders struggling to get into this thing that's moving at 100 miles an hour. And I think having that conversation about how do we create the conversations that are wide enough and contextually nuanced enough that we are integrating into how the business does business and influencing that, rather than being a bolt on. That was really interesting to hear, and really, well, also reassuring for me, because I think a big part of how we structured our original framework that informed what we've built in the safety culture framework was about really trying to answer that problem, thinking about the broader operating context, so that you can give a language and an observation of factors that aren't normally within your gift to look to influence, to change the conversation. So that felt really clear in the room for people, that there's a huge amount of work that's being done to influence and connect the business, but probably people feeling very similar challenges around how you keep the safety agenda front and center when there's other pressures and pulls influencing how the business does business, really.
Yeah, I think that's I think if you'd speak to most people in my world, they'll have come across a challenge at one stage of trying to integrate what they do into the overall business function. We're seen very much as a not a money making part of the business, if you like, because we're a support function. Okay, then we moved on. Well, we moved on to your bit, which is kind of why everybody was there. Let's be honest. So it's you kind of took us through that. What influences behaviour. That sort of culture piece, your experiences, and we had that a bit of an exercise around, again, what works, what doesn't work from an influence and behaviour perspective. You introduced some of the tools that you would use, particularly the empathy map, which I thought was quite incredible, to be honest. In relatively sort of simple, I'm probably underplaying it a little bit, but the actual construct of it is quite simple, but actually the output of it, again, quite interesting in the room, how quickly people were a bit like, wow, there's quite a bit to go on, and we only really got them to focus on one particular behavior that they were struggling with at the moment. So I can imagine on a larger scaled project, that would be quite a meaty thing to use, but again, something that's very worthwhile.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, in a nutshell, what that exercise does, and I can describe it in a minute in case anybody wants to give it a try, but it's like an introduction to context mapping. That's a big part of what we do in culture work. To use a really silly example, I was moaning to you before we started, Sam, wasn't I, that it was tricky to get my kid into school today. It's the idea of, if your kid is messing about at school and the teacher's reporting it to you, as they did to me on Friday afternoon, you're not just going, they're a nightmare and they're a naughty kid, tell them off and give them more consequences, but you might be saying, well, what's the context? What had happened before? How, what might have agitated them? What were their energy levels? What was their general health? What's the stuff that might be influencing? I might sound like one of those parents that makes excuses, but from a psychology point of view, we work on this basis of really recognizing that as human beings, we're caught by this bias called fundamental attribution bias. We talked about that on Wednesday, didn't we? Which is this idea that when we see other people's behavior, we assume that it's about an inherent characteristic in them. And actually, it's not true. A lot of our behaviour is driven by context, the nudges, the experiences, the logical processing that we're doing within the environment. Like a big chunk of it, probably personality only equates to 30 to 40% when you look at the research data on it. So when we see someone behaving in a certain way, if we just assume it's because they're too lazy to follow the safety protocol, or they're too old because they've always done it this way, those concrete characteristics, then it's really hard for us to influence that behavior because we're assuming that it's something set in them. But if we start to use something like an empathy map, or the safety culture framework that we've built is a behavior driver map that's saying, let's look at the context to see what is nudging and encouraging this behavior to flourish, and how do we prime it to make sure that it encourages the behavior that we want. So what the empathy map allows you to do is take a behavior that either you keep seeing over and over again that you do not want to see, or take one that you do want to see. And basically, let's start with the one that you don't want to see. You kind of put that at the center, and then you just properly stand in that person's shoes for a minute and think, well, what is it that they're seeing, hearing, feeling, believing, and saying themselves that is influencing that behavior turning up, that's permitting and making that behavior feel like the best choice within the circumstance. And whenever we map all of their world and think, well, what is it that is encouraging that behavior to appear, then we can look at that and go, well, which bits of that can we influence? So if they are seeing that they have production targets that mean that they can't keep the safety cover on the line because it stops them reaching around and doing things as quickly, then they're more likely to remove it. If they're not seeing that, then it's more likely, or they've got a cover that isn't inhibiting their speed of completion, then it's much more likely that they'll comply to the behaviour that's in place. So if we can start to be curious about what is driving the behaviour that we're seeing, we're mapping it out with that kind of feeling, seeing, hearing, experiencing, saying, then we're able to start to map the environment and figure out what's going on. And so we introduced those concepts because they really underpin the work that we've done together on the safety driver map, which isn't just going, how do we convince these people not to, through training, to not do this annoying behaviour or unsafe behaviour anymore? So how do we try and change the person? It's more about how do we shift the environment where we can. Not everything is environment, but a reasonable chunk of it is. So how do we notice where the environment might be nudging behaviour that we don't want? So we did an exercise to prime people and kind of help people see the value of looking at that context in their own world before we then ask them to evaluate the framework as a more structured way of mapping that world, rather than just trying to figure it all out yourself on an empathy map. It's a really great starting point, but you can miss stuff. I think the idea of building a more structured framework is we're giving you nudges to think about how all the different relevant factors might be influencing things.
Yeah, and I've never used that the empathy mapping. I think empathy is a massive sort of is it skill, personality trait? That safety professionals need to understand the context behind someone's behaviour. Too often we're very quick to blame the individual without trying to understand what's going on in and around or influencing that behaviour. And I think just doing that really simple exercise, with handouts, it kind of opened a few eyes in the room, particularly in actually it's not the individual, it's all these things that are at play, and actually these are the things that I need to try and influence. And really good exercise. Very simple, very straightforward. Not going to say it's easy to deal with the stuff that comes out the back of it, but you've got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. But and I think that the important thing to say is that empathy is different from sympathy. What we're not saying, so as I say to my kids' teacher whenever I force her to have the conversation that she doesn't want on these sort of things, there's a different things between explaining and excusing behaviour. We're using the empathy map to understand what's driving the behaviour so we can influence it. We're not saying, well, of course that's perfectly acceptable because all this is happening. So it's a really useful way to start to explore different ways that we might be able to influence people's behaviour. And it just opens our playbook up then as professionals, because we're not going, oh God, I've done training 942 times. What new piece of training do I do to try and change this behaviour? you're going, okay, what is at the root, what really is influencing this, and how might I need to shift how the team talks to each other around safety behaviours, or how our equipment is set up to help people hit their targets, or how easy it is to, we had an example, didn't we, in the room about some new kits being implemented within one of the sites, but they'd implemented it as one big piece of the kit at one end of a big site, rather than lots of people having a small personal piece of that kit to make it more accessible. So things like that, where noticing how we operationalise stuff will make it more likely that people will adopt usage. It's game changing, and it gives us much more to influence, I guess, as professionals, which is what we want, isn't it? Choices, different levers to nudge to get the outcomes that we need.
Yeah, because invariably it's never going to be one thing that's going to solve everything. It's then trying to be quite tactical in where are you going to get the biggest influences, biggest changes to get to where you want to get to. Yeah. And then once we've blown everybody's minds a little bit with that sort of exercise, overwhelmed them all in just how much they need to kind of lean into, we introduced the framework. So we kind of took the group through the 4 cultural drivers that we've identified, and then a little bit of sort of background behind that. We've done a bit of pre-work in kind of creating some, basically just some giant flip chart post-it notes that we'd populated around the room, and we got the group to, I guess, sort of interact with I think that's probably the right word, the framework. In what would you see in the sort of cultural drivers and the elements that make up those cultural drivers? Where are the challenges that you see from a behavioural perspective? Where are the kind of positives in the behaviours that you want to see? Just to sort of understand whether it aligns with I guess where we were going with it. So we had one up with leadership tone, so we took the group through that and the reasons behind why we think that makes part of the framework. Then the systems and processes, the employee readiness and the operating context, and kind of walked through that quite slowly. And, why has it appeared in our framework? Why do we think this influences behaviours? And what do we think sort of good looks like? And then got the group to play around with that to kind of really see if it aligned with our own thinking. And again, came away with just hundreds of different post-it notes. I think the general consensus I got is that we weren't a million miles away, and the feedback that I've since had on the framework has been incredibly positive. So relief moment that we're one of those where we thank God for that. But yeah, I again, I don't know what you took away from that, but what walking around the room, having the conversation, seeing what was on the post-it notes, was kind of one of those moments. I think, actually, I think the construct and the framework they've created, those 4 cultural drivers, play nicely into what we're trying to do, and was generally quite chuffed actually in a lot of the things that we were seeing being put up onto the giant post-it notes.
Yeah, same. I think I was really reassured by the robustness of the conversation and quite how people were testing it and playing with it. I heard a couple of people playing with real life, things that they're struggling with at the minute and where they would play out on the matrix, which was great. I think what we got in the post-it notes was really helpful. I think it aligned, as you say, really closely to where we were already, but some really nice adds that, it's impossible to think of everything, is it, as 2 of us?
Yeah.
So it felt really reassuring, actually, to get some nice nudges and adds on that. The thing that felt most powerful to me, and I suppose I've got the cap on this in terms of, how are we going to use this moving forward, and what does this do, not just in terms of clarity, but also support capability building for businesses that use it moving forward. And what I really loved is that final conversation that we had about, where's your starting point with this? How would you use this? And there was a number of different people in the room saying, it's definitely leadership tone. And then somebody else would go, no, it's operating context. And someone else said it was employee readiness. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the whole point of this, is that this framework is broad enough that all of these things are important, but different ones will be important at different points in time for you. So it's not about opening this ridiculous, unreasonable Pandora's box of trying to do everything at once. But what I saw was not only did it give people that breadth of perspective, and there was definitely some wide eyes in the room for a minute, wasn't there, when everybody first started to map out their whole matrix. But before people left on the day, they were already starting to process and filter and go, so in my world, given that I'm dealing with this and I want this to happen next, we did like a vision setting and goal setting exercise, didn't we? But with that, people were really starting to filter, well, what's the next few steps for me?
Yes.
What's the stuff that I need to lead into to move this forward? So it not only did it feel like it was accurately helping people map their world, what I could see already was happening was it was helping people prioritize the next steps that were relevant to their context rather than relevant to the six-step standardized program that the framework says they need to follow, which is what it is the absolute opposite of what it's about. It's about creating that breadth of clarity and chance for targeted prioritization.
Yeah.
So that felt really good, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point in that, there was definitely a little bit of, and you get this, and I get this with a lot of the companies that I work with on a day-to-day basis, is there's a bit of overwhelm sometimes in just where are we supposed to start with all of this. And I think sometimes the hardest part is almost asking the question, but then you've got to deal with the answer. And I always say, people always said, you ought to be careful what you're asked for sometimes. But some of the examples and the context that were being provided in the room, and I won't go into detail because it's not fair, but they it was very much, well, we need to start with the operating context because we need to make sure that the environment is set up for us to be able to go to the next step. That's great, but the leadership tone has still enabled the environment not to be at a condition that you feel conducive to do this type of activity. So we need to understand that, and actually your systems are now telling me that these things aren't being identified at an early enough stage for intervention. So it then started to unravel a little bit, and you're like, right, okay, so if we start here but we do a little bit of that and a little bit of that at the same time, and then we mop up that, and then so people were starting to sort of piece it together. And I think it's really valid that whilst there is a framework, it's not rigid in that you have to start in a particular place. The whole point is to, well, where are you now? Where do you want to get to? And how do we use this framework to kind of tease out that information we need to get you to that next level? And it's why that exercise you did at the end around what does good look like, or what does the future look like in 3 or 4 years' time? What are people saying? How does it feel? What are you hearing? It kind of almost flipped it on its head, and there was almost okay, right, we're going to shoot to the future, and then we've just got to find where we need to bridge the gap in between. And I thought that was quite a nice exercise, because whilst there was a bit of a, oh my good God, it was almost, okay, what tactics do we need to get? And there was a bit of clarity in what they were trying to do.
Yeah, and I think the thing I saw was that kind of that natural mindset shift. I should learn how to say that, given how often I say it in my profession. Mindset shift, but that natural mindset shift that I think comes with taking more of an outcome focus rather than a task focus.
Yeah.
So certainly that was one of the real criticisms when I built up the method for the employee experience project. One of my biggest criticisms of the traditional approach to broader cultural audits is you end up with this list of tasks that you feel that you need to work through, and it's about how do I improve the tea bags in the staff canteen, or make leaders more visible, or whatever it may be in the HR world. And you end up with all of these tasks and you're not really sure what the outcome is, other than people say they'll be a bit happier. You do all these tasks and people aren't any different. And so the vision exercise that we did at the end of the day was about supporting people to think more about, well, what is it we're trying to be? Ultimately, what does good look like for us in an accessible time frame? And then let's come back and set some goals for the first step towards getting to that. And if I do that, then I can look at my framework and all of the factors that I've evaluated and say, well, which 3 or 4 of these will meaningfully combine to get to that goal? So it makes goal setting and prioritization less focus on, I've got 900 things to do and which are the ones that I can tick off opportunistically today, to actually I'm contracting with my stakeholders that we're going to get to this milestone, and I need help and support to implement these 3, 4, 5, 6 things effectively to get to that outcome. So I think that's the idea, is that it's it's giving you choices, but it's allowing you to see where the system interacts. And it may not be that you do everything in operating context, exactly as you say. The factor that was talked about in the room for the people that was really important to, you could see that, yes, there was some operating context work that needed to be done, but there was a little bit of systems refinement or improvement and some leadership engagement that needed to happen to make that thing worthwhile and it not slide back to where it had been previously. So the action plan on that was much more likely to succeed with the breadth of focus around it, for sure.
Yeah, and it's why, and again, I think we talked about this in the last in our last musings, that it's important that what you want to achieve is realistic to the environment in which you find yourself in at the moment, because too often people will shoot for the stars and get nowhere near it. And again, that was kind of a large talking point on the day, isn't it? That we've been here, we've done it, and then 3 months down the line everything falls off because it just feels too hard, too clunky. It feels like we're sort of pushing heavy weights up a hill, and the wheels just fall off really, really quickly. And the way that we sort of, and I've been there, I'll be completely honest, and we sort of said, well, that's because did it feel too unrealistic in what you were trying to achieve to where you are at the time? So what you've got to do is almost kind of set yourself up in short milestones. And again, this is what you talked about. I think you said, was it sort of a 90-day type?
Yeah, I did talk about that. I'd forgotten. Yeah, so that idea of taking a more sprint approach where you're focusing on one or two tangible goals for a short period of time. I think one of the things that really kills culture change, and I think what a lot of processes and systems around it do, is they try and change everything at once, and there's this like incremental drift that doesn't really change. Everything's changed a little bit, but it doesn't click. And what we find works much better to build trust and get a broader range of people involved, so that you're creating the momentum that you need, I guess, to get that buy-in, is taking more of a 90-day. Well, the timing kind of 90 days works quite nicely, I think, in a business context, giving everything else that you need to do, but kind of choosing a priority and spending a little bit of time defining that, understanding that with the people who are going to have to operationalize it. So not just doing it ourselves in the background and then trying to convince everybody of it, but co-creating that and agreeing rules and actions and being really clear on that. Then taking the time to make that intervention live. So the next kind of 30 days or so, really activating that, making it happen, really supporting and observing people and coaching them really to show up the way that they need to. And then the final piece is about a real conscious period of embedding, where you're saying, well, we've got it now. How do we do this in a way that is less about me holding your hand or encouraging you to kind of, or having to be here while you demonstrate that? What is it that you need, that we need to embed this and make this a thing that you do every day, rather than it being something that I need to stand behind? So that kind of three-piece: co-creation and ideation, supported activation, and then embedding, and us like removing ourselves so that the system isn't reliant on us always being there, and then doing that process over and over again actually gives you much more manageable set of kind of changes that are more concrete and observable. So that works beautifully. Like it's a very, I was going to say traditional, it's a very common behavior change cycle. You think about people who do work where behavior change kind of works in health and fitness, social health models, etc. Often things like that are kind of 3-month campaigns to get people moving with really discrete stages to move you through it. So yeah, help people work through the cycles and work up the complexity as you go, as you build trust and capability.
And that should remove some of that initial overwhelm, because essentially you're going to go into these kind of things, and what you're trying to change are probably going to be very deep-rooted sort of behaviours and cultures that have been there for a very, very long time, and trying to do it all at once is based on the conversations that we had on the day and the questions we were asking. A lot of people in there were like, it just doesn't work, because you get to a point where it just falls by the wayside. So kind of things that we talked about, very much what you articulated there, is small bite-sized chunks going after those big ticket things that are going to really make a difference.
I always use the analogy that behaviour change or culture change is a bit like playing snooker, but someone else is throwing a load of balls onto the table while you're trying to do it. You know, that it never stays still. You can't make a plan in the way that a snooker player can, because you don't know. Well, even they can, because they've got an opponent who messes things up on them, don't they, if they get a chance. But you can't guarantee, you can't set the deck for the goals, or for the balls just to go into the nets that you want, because they're bouncing off each other, other stuff's getting lobbed in. So that kind of more cyclical approach allows you to lift your head and go, well, where are we now? What's our next goal? Where are all the balls on the table, and how might we influence those to get the one that we want into the pocket that we want to? So I think there's that piece to think about, in terms of not having this huge lumbering plan that becomes out of date almost as soon as you change one variable in that system. That plan isn't in place anymore. And again, for me, that's what excites me about seeing how live and flexibly people were using the framework in the room, because the goal for me has always been about, and I think what probably excited you most about it when we first talking about it, is that it's not this one and done assessment that you have to live by for the next 3 years. The goal is yes, doing that evaluation for you, but it's in that process teaching your business and building the capability in your business that you can continue to evaluate that over time. So basically what you end up with is more a dashboard or a scorecard that's continually evolving, and as you look to activate a new piece of change, you can see how stuff's evolved a bit and then shift it again. So we haven't really talked about that bit in terms of, well, once you've got the data, what do you do with it? But I think the ethos for both of us is less about appearing to do those audits every 3 years for people, and them not have, and things being really tricky to change in between. It's about giving tools into organisations that they can use to build the capability and proactivity around influencing this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely the right thing for us to do, is build the capabilities within organisations for them to become almost self-sufficient in what they're trying to do, and be able to use what we've created with change that's coming up, change that's afoot. If we're both very passionate about this, then we need to be sort of helping people along on their own journey. And I think we said on the day, if we're still with you after sort of 24 months, something's gone horribly wrong, and that's probably on us, because we want to sort of set you up to be able to take this forward and do it yourself, basically, moving forward.
Well, and my experience in running the Employee Experience Project is that's entirely doable. The vast majority of our clients, over about 18 to 24 months in length, don't need us anymore, and I'm delighted about that. Or if they do need us, we come in on maybe a once yearly basis, just I used the analogy on the day, didn't I, of culture being like changing a soup. I think there is a benefit of every now and then the chef popping up, or someone who's not in the soup popping up and going, what flavour is this and what are you trying to do next? So we do that piece kind of annually with some clients, just for like half a day to check in and make sure that everything feels like it needs to be. But if it's any more than that, then we really haven't supported you to build the capability that you need.
Yeah. So all in all, just an incredible day. I'm so glad we did it. I wasn't very glad at about 8:30 that morning, thinking, good Lord, what have we done? But yeah, I'm so glad we did what we did, because I'm really conscious that it's not, from a safety lens perspective, it's not just me that's sort of inputting into this. It's other professionals that have lived and breathed, the challenges and the experiences of things that have gone well and things that have been, a little bit more challenging. And when we started building this, it was actually, I think it was you, Paula, that mentioned, is it worth pulling together, a room of people that want to come and test and play with it. And I think it was a great shout. We've come away with loads of different ideas and tweaks, and I guess looking now at more at that deployment stage now, what it looks like when we actually go into an organisation and start implementing and using the tools that we've started pulling together.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's kind of our next test piece, isn't it? Where we're going to pilot the framework with a couple of organisations to really make sure that it works in practice in the way that both testing it between us and also between our kind of mini advisory board has allowed us to do, but also then get really clear, I think, on which bits of support are the most helpful ones to give for implementation and leverage, because I think this piece around leverage of value is critical. The framework will give a huge amount of value in terms of insight, but if we don't really, we need to now really get clear on how we support organisations in using that information independently moving forward. So that's our next experiment, which I imagine we'll be happy to take people on as we go.
Oh yes. Yes, yes, more than happy. So and I think we'll continue doing these, won't we? As we as time goes on. Just so I guess I've quite enjoyed being completely open and honest and transparent with what we're trying to do in the sort of, like I said, the mad journey that we've decided to take. I've had a couple of comments from people in my network that I've really enjoyed them and sort of taking stuff away from them. So it's I definitely think we'll continue doing these.
No, I think so. So I think we've got our next steps are we've got the framework to review and just do the final tweaks based on the lovely feedback that we've got. And in fact, look at this, I've got all the post-it notes right beside me for a bit of geek off at some point.
There's the bit that no one sees, right? The bit that no one sees after workshop is the mountain of post-it notes and flip chart paper. Yeah.
My office isn't very huge, so it will be extremely covered. It's not as fancy as the room that we were in on Wednesday. So
no.
I'm definitely going to be overfaced with post-it notes when I get that out, but it's just easier, isn't it? Than I don't know. I like it better than looking at the pictures. I know we've got those, but it just feels nicer looking. I'm just giving away my age, aren't I? Like the paper. So we've got that bit of work to do, and then I guess we'll get moving on the piloting piece and update you as we go on that. Really.
Yeah, sounds good. And if anybody out there wants to have a chat, I know that we've had a few people kind of drop in on comments and stuff. Then contact us on LinkedIn. We're more than happy to kind of walk you through what we've done and how we've ended up with the framework that we've got. Answer any questions. Reach out. We'll keep you posted with other videos or LinkedIn lives that we're doing in the future.
That's good. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.